The Avro Lancaster is the most famous bomber Britain ever built. But it's only half the story, a chain that runs from canvas biplanes to a delta-winged jet that flew the longest bombing raid the world had ever seen. One of these machines, in 1982, flew 8,000 miles to drop a single load of bombs, and how Britain got there is the whole story. Across nearly 70 years, this is every British bomber ever built. More than 30 aircraft, in order, none skipped. Together, they dropped over 1.3 million tons of bombs. You think you know where this begins? You don't, because Britain's first real heavy bomber was almost too big to fly. Britain's first true heavy bomber spanned 100 feet, the largest aircraft the country had ever built. Its wings folded just to fit inside a hangar. The Handley Page 0100 was so massive that crews simply called it Big Handley. On the night of March the 16th, 1917, it crossed the lines and bombed a German rail junction. But its two engines could not lift everything Britain wanted it to carry. So Handley Page fitted more powerful Rolls-Royce Eagles and built the 0400, the country's first real strategic bomber. In 1918, it struck German cities with the independent force and dropped a 1,650-pound bomb, the heaviest any Allied aircraft carried in the war. Over 500 were built, and still, none of them could reach the target Britain wanted most: Berlin. So Handley Page went bigger still. The four-engined V-1500 stretched its wings to almost 130 feet, the widest span of the war, and was built for a single mission: to bomb Berlin. Two were armed and fueled. But before they could take off, the armistice was signed. The Berlin bomber never dropped a bomb in anger. While the giants grabbed the headlines, a smaller machine did the daily work. The Airco DH-44 was fast enough to outrun most fighters. Its rushed successor, the DH-9, got a weaker engine, and crews paid for it in losses. So engineers bolted in the American Liberty engine, and the DH-9A finally delivered. One last heavy came too late to fight: the Vickers VIMY. Only a handful were ready before the guns fell silent, so it never bombed anyone. Instead, in June 1919, two men flew a Vimy non-stop across the Atlantic, 16 hours from Newfoundland to Ireland, the first crossing of that ocean without a single stop. The bomber that missed its war rewrote aviation history. But peace nearly killed the British bomber altogether, and what came next moved backward, not forward. Peace came, and with it, the budget cuts. With no war to fight, Britain went back to cheap, slow biplanes of wood and canvas. For nearly 15 years, the British bomber walked backward. The Vickers Virginia was the face of that era. A huge, ugly biplane that somehow became the backbone of the RAF's heavy night bombing for 13 years. Slow and outdated from day one, but it was what Britain had. Handley Page answered with the Hyderabad, a heavy bomber built entirely of wood. So when wood was no longer enough, they rebuilt it in metal and changed the engines, and the Hinaidi was born. The same airframe, pushed from wood into metal. Then came the strangest of them all, the Handley Page. Hayford hung its fuselage from the upper wing instead of the lower one, a silhouette like nothing else in the sky. That oddity brought the bombs closer to the ground for faster rearming. It was the RAF's main heavy bomber of the 1930s, and the last heavy biplane still flying, right up to 1941. The Bolton-Paul Overstrand looked like just another biplane, but it hid a first: the Royal Air Force's first enclosed, powered nose turret, which spared the gunner from freezing in the wind. Only 28 were built, but that rotating dome pointed the way forward. And then, among all those biplanes, something different appeared. The Fairy Hendon didn't have two wings, it had one. Low wing, all metal, the RAF's first fully metal monoplane bomber. Only 14 were built, but it showed the future. The biplane was dead and didn't know it yet. One old-timer remained. The Vickers Wildebeest was a torpedo biplane already obsolete in 1932. It should have grown old quietly. Instead, in 1942, squadrons of these slow biplanes took off in Singapore and Java against the Japanese fleet. They were slaughtered. The RAF's last torpedo biplane died charging modern fighters. Its sacrifice was the clearest signal yet. War was back, and Britain could no longer afford to fly slow. At last, the RAF had its monoplanes. Metal, not canvas. Fast, modern, the last word in 1936. But the war would teach a brutal lesson. Modern on paper means nothing when the enemy shoots back. Nobody learned it harder than the Fairey battle. On paper, it had everything, including the same Merlin engine as the Spitfire. But it was slow, poorly armed, and flew without escort. In May 1940, 71 battles were sent to destroy the bridges over the Meuse River. 40 didn't come back, a 56% loss rate in a single operation. The crews attacked knowing it was near suicide. 2 earned the RAF's first Victoria Crosses of the war, both posthumous. The Bristol Blenheim told the same story from the other side. In 1935, it was faster than the fighters meant to shoot it down, and it looked unstoppable. But technology doesn't wait. Within 5 years, German fighters left it behind, and it went from untouchable to easy prey. The speed that dazzled everyone was worthless half a decade later. The Handley Page Hampden earned its fame from its shape. Its fuselage was so narrow the crew was jammed in like tools in a case. They called it the flying suitcase. Nimble but just as vulnerable by day, it was exiled to the night. While these failed in daylight, the Armstrong Whitworth Whitley found its home in the dark, with its unmistakable nose-down stance. It was the workhorse of the early nights. In 1939, it crossed Germany, first dropping leaflets, then bombs. And out of all those lessons came the first one that truly worked. The Vickers Wellington hid a secret in its skeleton. Engineer Barnes Wallis built it with a geodesic structure, a crisscrossed metal lattice like a basket. It looked strange, but it was almost miraculous. When a shell tore a piece out of a Wellington, the lattice spread the load and the aircraft kept flying. One came home with 203 hits, landed safely, and took off again that same night. That toughness made it the backbone of the RAF, over 47,000 sorties and the lowest loss rate of any medium bomber. 11,000 were built, more than any other British bomber. But the Wimpy still had only 2 engines. And Britain had just realized that to win, it would need 4. 4 engines. That was the answer. If 2 weren't enough to carry the war into the heart of Germany, Britain would build bombers with twice as many. But the greatest of them all wasn't born from a triumph. It was born from a disaster. The first was the short Stirling, the RAF's first four-engine bomber in service. It should have been king, but one absurd decision doomed it. The specification demanded its wings fit inside existing hangars, so they were made too short. The result was a giant that couldn't climb. It flew so low that in the big formations, bombs from the other bombers fell onto it from above. So attention turned to the Handley Page Halifax. This one worked. Rugged and adaptable, it flew more than 75,000 operations as a bomber, transport and submarine hunter. The eternal number 2, always in the shadow, but a tireless workhorse. And now, the failure that started it all. The Avro Manchester was meant to be a great bomber, but it was crippled by 2 Rolls-Royce Vulture engines, unreliable, prone to overheating, and sometimes catching fire in mid-air. Crews were dying from their own engines, not the enemy. In little more than a year, it was withdrawn. But then engineer Roy Chadwick looked at that doomed airframe and saw what no one else could. The plane wasn't bad, the engines were. So he took the same fuselage, ripped out the 2 Vultures, and bolted on 4 Rolls-Royce Merlins, the same as the Spitfire. From the corpse of the Manchester rose the finest bomber Britain ever built. The Avro Lancaster changed everything. It carried more bombs, farther and higher, than anything before it. Its bomb bay swallowed loads no other aircraft could even lift. Across the war, Lancasters dropped more than 608,000 tons of bombs over roughly 156,000 sorties. But its legend was forged in a single night. In May 1943, 19 Lancasters took off on an impossible mission. Barnes Wallis, the man behind the geodesic structure, had invented a bomb that skipped across water like a stone. The target, the dams of the Ruhr, the industrial heart of Germany. Flying 50 feet above the water, in total darkness, they released their bouncing bombs. 2 dams burst. 16 of the 19 crews never came home. They became legend under one name, the Dam Busters. Behind that glory was a brutal truth. A bomber crewman had a lower chance of surviving than a soldier in the trenches of the Somme. They were kids of 19 and 20, and more than 55,000 of them died. Every night they climbed aboard, knowing many would never see the dawn. The Lancaster was a masterpiece, but it flew on the shoulders of a generation that paid for every ton in blood. And even this giant couldn't do everything, because another bomber was winning the war the opposite way, without a single machine gun and made of wood. The Lancaster won through brute force. But another British aircraft won by doing the reverse: no armor, no guns, not even metal. And it was one of the deadliest planes of the war. The de Havilland Mosquito was made of wood. In the middle of an aluminum shortage, de Havilland built it from plywood, assembled in part by furniture factories. They called it the Wooden Wonder, and it sounded like madness until it took off. The Mosquito was so fast it did not need to defend itself. When a fighter appeared, it simply accelerated and vanished. So they did the unthinkable and stripped out every defensive gun. Every pound saved was more speed. That made it the most versatile aircraft of the war. Precision bomber, night fighter, reconnaissance plane, and pathfinder, with the lowest loss rate in all of Bomber Command. In 1944, it flew at rooftop height to blast open the walls of Amiens prison and free resistance prisoners before their execution. Nearly 8,000 were built. The plane that should not have worked became one of the most brilliant Britain ever designed. The world of specialists produced 2 brothers. The Bristol Beaufort, was the Royal Air Force's standard torpedo bomber of the early years, diving low against Axis shipping. From its design came something deadlier: the Bristol Beaufighter, the bow, lethal in 2 roles. As one of the first true radar-equipped night fighters, and as an anti-ship hunter armed with torpedoes and rockets. It's said Japanese troops in Burma nicknamed it Whispering Death, because its engines were barely heard until it was too late. Not all of them were so lucky. The Vickers Warwick was the Wellington's big brother, built with the same geodesic structure, but it arrived late and with poor engines. So it never shined as a bomber. It found another purpose instead, flying over the sea to drop lifeboats to downed crews. The bomber that came too late ended up saving lives instead of taking them. And as the war wound down, the last of the line arrived. The Avro Lincoln was born as a bigger Lancaster. In fact, it started life as the Lancaster Mark IV. But it came too late to drop a single bomb in the war. It became the RAF's last piston-engined heavy bomber, serving in the colonial wars of Malaya and Kenya. With it, 70 years of propellers and pistons came to a close. But in some hangar, a new engine was starting to roar. No propeller, no pistons, just a stream of pure fire. The age of the propeller was over. The new engine didn't roar. It howled. In 1949, Britain's first jet bomber took off, and 70 years of propellers were gone in an instant. The English electric Canberra inherited an old idea: the Mosquitoes. No guns, no armor, just speed and altitude. It was the Mosquito turned jet. But it had a weapon the Mosquito could only dream of: the sky itself. It flew so high that no fighter of its era could reach it. Its ceiling brushed 50,000 feet, and in 1957 one set the world altitude record, climbing above 70,000. And then something remarkable happened. The United States was so impressed, it bought the license and built it on American soil as the Martin B-57. For the first time in a generation, the US Air Force adopted a combat aircraft designed abroad. The British bomber took off with the American star on its wings, but its greatest feat was time. The Canberra flew with the RAF for 57 years, one of the longest-serving combat aircraft in history. Grandchildren flew the same model their grandfathers had, a design so far ahead that time took half a century to catch up to it. But flying high and fast was no longer enough. The world was entering its most terrifying age, and Britain needed something that could carry the most destructive weapon ever created. Now the stakes were the end of the world. In the depths of the Cold War, Britain needed to cross Soviet skies and level cities with a single bomb. So it didn't build one nuclear bomber. It built 3. They called them the V-Force, and each was a different bet. One would fail, one would be forgotten, and one would become legend. The first to fly was the Vickers Valiant, the most conventional, the safe design. And it worked. It was the only V-bomber to drop live nuclear weapons. In 1957, it released Britain's first hydrogen bomb over the Pacific. But its end came all at once. In 1965, they found fatigue cracks in the wings. The metal was breaking apart. Overnight, the whole fleet went to the scrapyard. The first to arrive was the first to die. So the nuclear load fell to the second, and it was a work of art. The Handley Page. Victor had a silhouette from the future, a crescent wing, curved and sharp. It is said one touched the speed of sound in a dive, unthinkable for its size. But the age of the high-altitude bomber was dying. Soviet missiles could now reach those heights. So the Victor found an unexpected second life. They stripped out the bombs and turned it into a tanker. And that humble conversion would place it at the heart of the RAF's boldest mission ever. Because the third one remained. The legend. The Avro Vulcan looked like nothing else on Earth. A giant delta wing, a black triangle that blotted out the sun. And when its 4 Olympus engines roared at full power, you didn't hear it. You felt it. The legendary Vulcan howl shook people's chests miles away. For 30 years, it was the tip of Britain's deterrent, waiting on an order that thankfully never came. Until, in 1982, a different one did. When Argentina seized the Falklands, they were 8,000 miles from Britain. Too far, everyone believed, for the RAF to respond. They were wrong. They sent a single Vulcan to bomb the runway at Port Stanley in the longest-range attack ever attempted. And here the Victor returned. To carry 1 bomber to the islands and back took 11 tankers, refueling in a chain over the South Atlantic in the dead of night, even refueling each other so that a single Vulcan could keep going. Without the elegant, forgotten Victor, the Vulcan never would have made it. It dropped 21 bombs. A single one hit the runway. The physical damage was limited, but the message was devastating. It's said that one crater proved to Argentina that no part of its territory was safe, and forced it to pull fighters back to defend the mainland. A single aircraft from the far side of the planet changed the math of a war. It was everything the Hook had promised. And so, slowly the V-force faded. But the Vulcan refused to die. One of them, MH558, was kept flying for years purely on donations from thousands of people who couldn't bear a sky without its howl. In 2015, it flew for the last time. Crowds filled the fields of England to see it off, many in tears, hearing that unmistakable roar one final time before the silence fell. But the story wasn't over. Because the next generation wouldn't fly higher or farther. It would fly lower than ever, faster than sound. Missiles had killed the high-altitude bomber. Flying high was no longer hiding. It was painting a target on yourself. So the new generation did the opposite. It dropped down to skim the ground, slipping under the radar so close to the Earth, the enemy never saw it coming. Nobody did it better than the Blackburn Buccaneer. Built to fly from carriers, it screamed just above the waves at breakneck speed. Pilots loved it. It's said some came back with branches caught in the wings. That's how low they flew. Then came the one that defined the modern RAF. The Panavia Tornado, a joint European project, had one great trick. Variable geometry wings that opened for takeoff and swept back to tear across the sky. For 40 years it was Britain's spearhead, the direct grandson of the Vulcan. In the 1991 Gulf War it went in low against Iraqi airfields, the most dangerous mission of all, and paid a price in blood. When it retired in 2019, it closed 4 decades of service. Its successor flies today. The Eurofighter Typhoon was born as a pure fighter, but it's also the RAF's frontline strike aircraft, in combat over Libya and against the Islamic State. It's the living link in the chain, the air that today does the same job. Those fragile canvas biplanes began in 1916. But the story of the British bomber doesn't end in triumph. It ends with a ghost. In the 1960s, Britain built an aircraft so far ahead of its time, it was hard to believe. The BAC TSR-2 was supersonic, able to fly at ground level at more than twice the speed of sound, with avionics from another decade. It's said to have been, quite simply, the most advanced aircraft in the world. In 1964, it took off and flew magnificently. And then they killed it. In 1965, the government cancelled the program outright. Not a MiG, not a missile, but cost and politics. And they weren't content to cancel it. They ordered the jigs, the tooling, and nearly every prototype destroyed, so no one could ever bring it back. It was an execution. It's said that every British strike aircraft since has been an attempt to recover what the TSR-2 already was in 1964. From a canvas biplane that could barely cross the English Channel to a supersonic ghost too good to live, these were every bomber Britain ever sent into the skies. 70 years, more than 30 machines. One nation learning, again and again, to carry the war farther than anyone believed possible. For 70 years, Britain took the war to the skies. But long before that, it changed war on the ground forever, with a machine the world had never seen. Because it was Britain that invented the tank and threw it into the mud of the Somme when no one believed such a monster could exist. From those first steel hulls that barely crawled between the trenches to the armored hunters that rule the battlefield today, it's the same story, a nation building, failing, and building again. Every British tank in order from the first to the last. The screen is waiting for you.